WatchGuard Capital. Invest your time wisely. So I've been working on solving our national debt and tax code problems for a few years now. In my last video titled Inflation is Back, I show how the US Department of the Treasury estimates that our future unfunded obligations for the next 75 years grew from a net present value of $4 trillion to over $97 trillion in only 7 years, which is insanity because we're doing nothing about it. But some people think I'm wasting my time on this project because of modern monetary theory, or MMT. So I read Warren Mosler's Soft Currency Economics and Stephanie Kelton's The Deficit Myth, and there were some really interesting counterpoints and improvements to classical monetary theory models. But there was also one glaring flaw in MMT's logic, which I want to share with you in this video. According to Investopedia, MMT states that countries like the US, UK, Japan, and Canada, which spend, tax, and borrow in a fiat currency that they fully control, are not operationally constrained by revenues when it comes to federal government spending. Because they do not rely on taxes or borrowing for spending, since they can print as much as they need and are the monopoly issuers of the currency. Since their budgets aren't like a regular household's, their policies should not be shaped by fears of a rising national debt. So if that is true, then this next year and beyond modern monetary theory trust fund scam is a viable option to solve our financial problems. First, we will need the Department of the Treasury to order the US Mint to create some money. So let's say the Mint pulls a dollar bill out of circulation and writes $20 trillion on it with a Sharpie marker and calls it legal tender. Once done, the US Treasury deposits the $20 trillion in the General Fund, which is the account the US government pays most of its bills out of. The US Treasury then creates 3 new MMT trust fund accounts. MMT account number 1 will be for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which will be titled the Medicare and Medicaid Next Year and Beyond MMT Trust Fund. Account number 2 will be for Social Security, entitled the Social Security Next Year and Beyond MMT Trust Fund. And the third account will be titled the Departments of Defense and Veterans Affairs Next Year and Beyond MMT Trust Fund. All 3 accounts will pay for the benefits and expenses of these departments and programs starting next year and beyond. But first they need assets, so let's fix Social Security first by depositing the $20 trillion bill from the General Fund into that account. Social Security now has $20 trillion to pay benefits starting next year, but according to current law, any money not needed for current benefits today has to be invested in special issue Treasury bonds issued by the US Department of the Treasury. So Social Security buys a $20 trillion Treasury bond that yields 5% interest, which it will use to pay benefits starting next year, and completes the transaction by paying for the bond and transferring the $20 trillion bill back to the General Fund. Next, let's fix Medicare and Medicaid by transferring the $20 trillion bill into that account. Per current law, Medicare has to invest any funds not needed for current benefits in special issue Treasury bonds issued by the US Treasury Department. So it now has a $20 trillion Treasury bond yielding 5% and completes the transaction by paying for the bond and transferring the $20 trillion bill back to the General Fund. So let's go ahead and fix the unfunded benefits for military members and veterans now by completing the process one more time. And there you have it. All 3 programs now have a $20 trillion trust fund that will produce $1 trillion in interest starting next year and beyond to pay for future program costs. But let's continue the ruse of fiscal responsibility and use the $20 trillion bill that is now in the General Fund to buy $20 trillion of our national debt owned by the public. And since that transaction would cause the US Treasury Department to owe $20 trillion to itself, it could just retire those bonds and make them disappear. So here are some things you should know about this example. 1. All this is legal and how the unified budget started working in the late 1960s. The difference is we didn't do all these transfers at once, we did them over decades and decades. 2. Because the $60 trillion of special issue Treasury bonds are both assets of the government here, but also liabilities to the government here, they would cancel each other out under special government accounting rules, so you will not find them listed in the consolidated charts of assets and liabilities in our fiscal reports. Third, this $10 trillion payable IOU balance for federal employee and veteran benefits is woefully understated based on my own analysis. And there's not actually a trust fund set up today to pay these expenses because they are paid out of the General Fund. So I created this trust fund in this example and doubled the liability to be more honest about the obligation size. But there's not really a material difference in the government's position to honor a financial obligation between having a $1 trillion balance of special issue Treasury bond debt in a trust fund or having a placeholder on a spreadsheet for an obligation or liability that has been accrued but just not recognized as debt yet, which is one thing that MMT absolutely gets right. So we as a society could get rid of all of our current government trust funds and their quote-unquote asset balances, and it would neither increase or decrease the fiscal sustainability of our system. And fourth, the US Treasury Department does have an infinite ability to create money, because it could have easily added 3 more zeros with its Sharpie marker to that dollar bill and created $20 quadrillion. But the value of a dollar has a finite value that declines when prices rise, so there are limits on how much money that can be created before the negative impact of inflation outweighs the benefits of any possible government consumption and intervention. And given our current political landscape, we should strongly consider the consequences of bestowing the infinite ability to devalue our dollar to our elected officials, because they will absolutely use it in the short term for political agendas to the detriment of our children and future generations of Americans, and this is how I arrived at that conclusion. Anytime we reach the statutory debt limit these days, we play a game of political chicken, but it wasn't always this way. The Republican Party was established in 1854 and the Democratic Party in 1828, when the United States was still on a gold standard and fiat dollars could be converted to gold or silver. That conversion mechanism acted like a governor for our government to ensure that decisions these parties made regarding our long-term fiscal U.S. policies were sustainable. If spending was too high or taxes too low, the government was forced to adjust and course correct accordingly. In 1933, Democratic President Franklin Delano Roosevelt eliminated the ability for individuals to walk into a bank and convert U.S. dollars into gold. And in 1971, Republican President Richard Nixon eliminated the ability for foreign countries to exchange US dollar bills into gold through our central bank. And thus, the gold standard was officially eliminated, which paved the path for unsustainable fiscal policies. Now, sustainable fiscal policy could be higher spending with higher taxes or lower spending with lower taxes. The Democratic Party was half successful in its endeavors and did pass higher spending initiatives such as Social Security and Medicare. And the Republican Party was also half successful in its endeavors of achieving lower tax initiatives, such as making the estate tax basically obsolete and adding a lot of tax deductions to our tax code. And thus we have two halves of a sustainable fiscal policy that unfortunately yield an unsustainable one. And this is why some people love modern monetary theory, because if you choose not to analyze the theory very deeply, you can justify the continued inaction of our political system to address our unsustainable fiscal policies, or bank on solving them in the future with the MMT trust fund accounting gimmick presented earlier. But the one flaw that I can't get past is the assertion that national debt is an asset for future generations because it's the summation of uncollected tax revenue, which is a really complex statement, so let's turn it into a cartoon. Imagine two cities that have goods and services to offer each other but have no road to reach one another. It's not economically viable for any one citizen or company to take on the endeavor, so the government borrows $20 million and builds the road. Commerce commences and both cities benefit as wealth is created. The government is rewarded with higher gross product, which increases its tax revenue so that it can take on another endeavor in the future, whether that be national defense, healthcare, or another societal priority. The individuals, the cities, and the government benefited from this new national debt, and future generations will most likely as well from future endeavors or reduced tax rates because of increased productivity. So this national debt is an asset and viewed favorably. But now let's suppose that instead of a city, there was a remote vacation spot that people love to visit, that would increase their happiness and make life more meaningful, but because of the remoteness, only a few citizens would make the trek. So the government borrows $20 million again and builds the road. More citizens take a vacation and make the trek now that there's easier access. And they stay longer or spend less time in transit when returning to their homes and jobs, so the aggregate quality of life of society and utility has improved, and the national debt is once again an asset to future generations and viewed favorably by the current ones. But now let's suppose that the $20 million was spent to build a road to a bottomless pit that no one wants to visit and no one wants to fall in. No one makes the trek, so there's no economic impact on gross production or happiness. The road is viewed unfavorably, and neither current nor future Americans will benefit from this national debt. Or maybe the government didn't build the road to a bottomless pit, but for no reason whatsoever, or maybe purely political ones, ordered the construction crew to charge it 4 times the normal cost for materials and labor, and takes out 4 times the debt to cover the cost. This would naturally be viewed as an unfavorable action by the government and also detrimental to future citizens. But some will posit that under modern monetary theory, or MMT, that national debt is some type of gift to future Americans without determining the underlying impact on commerce and economic output, utility and quality of life, or if we just threw it down the proverbial bottomless pit. And it's that failure to identify the variable set to weigh the societal benefit against the societal cost of national debt that is my number one aggravation with MMT And I'm not one to kick the can down the road, so I figured out the variables, but I'm still working through the logic. Because it's reasonable to know if our national debt originated from an infrastructure project that powered American dreams for a century, fought off the risk of a global threat, or if it's because we aren't enforcing and modernizing our tax code. And whether the government chose to borrow money through a Treasury bond at a stated interest rate, or it used its monopolistic powers to create money at some incremental inflationary rate, really doesn't matter. What matters is that our policies are sustainable over the long run, so that we endow our children with the same opportunity to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that we inherited, will defend with our lives, but will squander with our lifestyle. And if it brings you peace of mind to fully embrace modern monetary theory, then you should do that. But I'm going to keep working on the contingency plan just in case. And you can support my efforts by subscribing to this channel or becoming a Patreon via the link in the description. I'm Stephen with WatchGuard Capital, reminding you to always invest your time wisely.